My river is so dark and murky. I don't even really know if there's any normal fish in there. Sometimes stuff moves around so close to the surface that I can see flashes of color, but that's about all. The thing that creeps me out about this is that if something decides to spontaneously pay me a visit, I might end up being none the wiser until it's too late. When I meet this snake that Fire had told me about though, I saw it coming from a mile away. It had been an alright day thus far. I'd already taken care of Miranda's daily trash bag and was basically just sitting there enjoying the weather. I found out that if I just pinched my nose and ignored the stench, I could look up at the summer sky and pretend that I'm in Vinci. I stayed there, just enjoying myself for a little while, when I heard a very deep, enormous sound. The water began to shake, like something insanely big was moving around underneath. Bubbles started showing up on the river's surface, so I knew something was coming long before I spotted it. It was not what I had expected. I caught more and more glimpses of moving shapes, bodies dragging themselves up from the depths. No two of them were the same, but they looked all sort of alike. Most of them were hairless with slick, smooth skin and muted but colorful hues. One swan right next to me, its skinny, dark blue arms rapidly flailing as it swept through the murky water. I leaned over the side of the boat to get a better look at it. I had never seen these creatures before. They were in too big of a rush to flee themselves to pose a threat. It was what these unnatural things were trying to escape from that scared me. I wasn't sure if they were able to speak or if they'd even understand me. I hesitated. Did they even have mouths? But ultimately called out to the nearest one nonetheless. "Hey, who are you guys? What's going on?" The blue one whipped its head around to face me for just a moment. Its voice sounded like a raspy, wet cough. "The snake's coming. Get away if you want to live." "Snake?" I repeated, eyes wide. "Hurry!" The river person shouted over their shoulder as the distance between us grew. I was still utterly bewildered, but I'd figured I'd simply have to take their word on it. I jumped behind the wheel and, trying my best to not cause any casualties, started plowing through the mass of writhing bodies. It was like the river had come alive with their fear. One by one, the creatures below laboriously rolled themselves up into the riverbank, some of them even attempting to crawl even further into the overgrown weeds, brushes, and trees that lined the water's edge. I allowed the boat to run into the dry land, quickly hopping out and pulling it to the shore the rest of the way, or at least part of it. I ducked down, seeking cover behind the vessel, but peeking out every once in a while as the splashes grew around me louder. I wondered if I was the only human around. The riverside isn't normally all that well visited, but sometimes there'd be a dog walker or some elderly folks out there for a stroll. How would they react to something like this? My thoughts were interrupted by the same deep rumbling noise from before, only it seemed much closer this time. I looked up to find the surface of the water breaking as something rose from the bottom. It was scaly, pearlescent, and of pale red color. In the sunlight, it gleamed like pure gold. The body of a snake, the middle part to be exact. There was neither a head nor a tail end anywhere in sight. Still, the part that was still showing was large enough to form a massive arc spanning from roughly 150 feet ahead of me, all the way to where the lake began. It was so fat too, almost as wide as the river itself. No wonder all these underwater people had taken flight. They would have most likely been forcefully tossed outside by this movement alone. This thing looked like it could squish me to death if it merely flopped around a little. Seeing it stirred up a strong sense of dread within me, but I couldn't bring myself to avert my eyes from it either. In a bizarre, terrifying way, the snake was beautiful. The spectacle was all over the blink of an eye, though. The snake's body dropped back down below the surface, sending an enormous wave of dirty water to splash down on both of the riverbanks. I quickly hid behind the boat again, but that didn't stop the water from crashing down on me, and within seconds, I found myself drenched from head to toe. The river people instantly began drawing back into the depths, and I was left on my own, staying speechless by the water's edge, staring with my mouth agape. Then my phone rang. I fumbled it out of my pocket with wet, wrinkly fingers. Unknown caller. "Hello? Gina, did you see that? It's you. Are you okay? How have you been?" I'm not calling to catch up. Did you see the snake? Yeah, I sure did. My heart's still pounding like crazy, I admitted. What is that thing? A snake. Of course, but what is it? I mean, I don't know where you grew up, but this isn't a snake like I've ever seen before. I don't know anything about it, to be honest. I never even saw its head. It lays dormant most of the time, but sometimes it just needs to stretch, I guess. Of course, that means anything on top of it gets thrown around like a leaf in a storm. You're not hurt though, right? No. Okay, I'm glad. You don't have my number saved, right? I got you as an unknown caller. Is that alright? He sighed. I guess. She's not looking for you, I assured him. If you say so. With that, he hung up. He'd sounded pretty unconvinced. I ended up pushing the boat back into the lake and waiting another couple of hours before ultimately calling it a day. The snake scare was still very much present in my mind, and I remember that my fingers didn't stop shaking the entire time. From then on, I viewed the river in a different way. I hadn't known of the snake beforehand, and I'd known of the river people, sort of at least, but I hadn't thought there'd be so many of them. And more importantly, I hadn't thought that the snake was so huge. I still couldn't believe that this entire affair had gone unnoticed by the general public thus far. I tried to contact my anonymous helper about it, but he didn't respond to any of my texts until around 2 months later. He has a habit of lying low and just disappearing for weeks on end occasionally. He's kind of paranoid. About 2 rather uneventful months after the incident, I spoke with Fire again. He showed up pretty much out of nowhere, simply pulling himself out of the water to look over the side of the boat and waited for me to address him. What are you doing here? I inquired gently after starting a little upon noticing. The Fire shrugged and brushed a strand of wet copper hair behind his ear. I was just thinking about you. I figured I'd come up to talk a little. I frowned in confusion. That sounds unlike you. Oh, so you know me well enough to tell? Now, there was definitely a little spite in that weird-ass voice of his. I'm sorry, I meant nothing by it. I just thought you didn't like me that much. I don't, but since Grayson isn't back, and the other folks from down here at the bottom seem to think you're kinda neat, I suppose I'm just trying to start thinking of you as tolerable, so you might as well help me out with that. He tilted his head. Entertain me. I might put in a good word for you with the snake. Entertain you how? I don't know. Talk to me. Tell me something interesting. I sighed. Look, man, I don't know what you want from me. I don't know any stories if that's what you mean. Shame. I bet the snake would have liked that. I'm not scared of the snake. Now, that was only partially true, but Fire looked impressed, so I just ran with it. I saw it the other day, you know. It's big, sure, but I don't know. I don't think it means any harm. It could have easily killed a whole bunch of creatures, and me too, but it didn't. It only, moved around a bit. So no, I'm not afraid of it. I don't think it's got any bad intentions. You're actually right about that. I know it pretty well, you see. Can you talk to it? I asked. Yes, we communicate regularly, though you probably wouldn't describe it as talking. We have our ways. What is it, exactly? Fire gave me half a smile. What do you think it is? I tilted my head back, looking up at the sky. I'm not sure. I was thinking of this old story I read once from Norse mythology. I used to be really into that kind of stuff. Anyways, you've got Loki, this trickster god, and he's a real asshole, and he just goes around cheating on his wife with a giantess or something. I don't rightly know anymore. But he gets her pregnant, and she gives birth to a whole bunch of messed up kids, one of which is this huge ever-growing spermant. The gods then threw it into the sea where it gets so big it wraps around the entire earth. I thought a snake might be a little bit like that. Fire now seemed quite intrigued. He leaned further over the railing, his eyes wide with astonishment. You think it might be a god? Maybe. It's beautiful. What I've seen of it, at least. It seemed more deity-like for sure. You okay? I inquired. Do you know what it is? I thought you had a connection or whatever. That doesn't mean I know everything about it, but I like your idea. It's kind of cool, I guess. Yeah, it would be neat if it was a deity. I mean, who else could say something like that about themselves? To have come face to face with an ancient god. Not too many of your people, that's for sure, if I replied gently. By the way, how come no one seems to notice stuff like this happening around here? You'd think a giant river monster appearing like that would draw some public attention, right? I wondered out loud. There's a good reason for that, actually. But I don't think I want you to know. It'd scare you off, for sure. Didn't you want me to leave? I reminded him. He gave me a sour look. Don't be so cow about it. With that, he let go of my boat and dropped back below the water surface. I actually saw the snake again not long after that. It had suddenly started raining while I was pretty far out on the lake, and I was in a hurry to get back to dry land in order to keep from getting drenched. Just as I was starting the boat, though, I heard a deep rumbling noise, and I was instantly reminded of the first time I'd encountered the serpent. This time, however, the sound wasn't as loud, and there were no river people taking flight. I waited, standing still atop my vessel, and gazing across the water with bated breath. Then, from the far end of the lake, something very slowly started rising from the depths. I could see the wave it created, rolling along the way before the object even broke through the surface. It was the tail end of the same shiny, scaly entity. It moved up as carefully as its great size allowed, and came to a halt just before it reached my boat, which was rocked by the wave nonetheless. I had to cling onto its side in order to stay atop. To my surprise, the tail arched to form something akin to a bridge above my head. I stood rooted to the spot, gaping at the snake's glistening, dripping underbelly. I didn't know what to do. I felt that primal fear again. My heart was pounding away frantically, but I was in awe nonetheless. That's when I realized there was nothing to be afraid of. Looking up, I noticed that the serpent's body was shielding me from the weather like an umbrella. The rain couldn't get to me anymore. My breaths remained shallow and much too soft, but I sat back down. I found that I could touch the beast if I just reached out with my arm. It felt sort of smooth and nice, which threw me off a little since I totally expected it to be slimy. The snake stayed in place, and I settled in beneath it to wait out the rain. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed today's story. Thank you so much for listening. Huge thanks to the wonderful Redditor, girl from the crypt, for allowing me to narrate your awesome series. Now, I do think this Redditor continued the series. I think it's discontinued, I'm not sure. But for now, I will count this as a finale, and I hope you guys enjoyed the series. Now, I'll see you guys on the next story. So, don't forget to sit back, relax, and indulge in fear.